Hello, I want to welcome everyone to this presentation on quality and rigor in qualitative research. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Pope, an assistant professor of educational research, and I specialize in qualitative research. I'm going to talk with you in this screencast about how to assess quality in qualitative research. I have several goals for us in this presentation, and I've listed them here as learning outcomes. So by the end of this presentation, you should make the paradigm shift necessary to understand quality and rigor in qualitative research, know how quantitative approaches to validity and reliability do not apply to qualitative research, understand the different approaches to establishing quality in qualitative research, and recognize what methods are needed to have a rigorous qualitative study. As Lincoln and Guba explain, nowhere can the conversation about paradigm differences be more fertile than in the extended controversy about validity. What this means is that how researchers answer the question, what makes good qualitative research, varies across paradigm, methodology, and focus. In this presentation, I will talk with you about the primary viewpoints and ways of assessing quality and rigor. A major difference you may notice throughout this presentation is the use of different terms to assess quality. For example, Lincoln and Guba explain in the 2011 Handbook of Qualitative Research that the paradigm you follow will determine the terminology you will use to assess the quality of your research project. They discuss how the positivist and post-positive paradigms use the term rigor to assess validity, reliability, and the objectivity of their studies. Critical theorists will focus on historical situatedness, erosion of ignorance and misapprehensions, and action stimulus to assess quality. Constructivist paradigms will attempt to provide examples of trustworthiness and authenticity. In their book Research Design, Qualitative, Quantitative, and Mixed Methods Approaches, Creswell and Creswell explain quality for qualitative research using the terms validity and reliability, which are two very quantitative terms. Finally, Tracy's 2010 article on validity develops 8, quote, big tent criteria that can be used to assess quality of qualitative research regardless of which paradigm you follow. Let's begin our conversation by discussing what validity means to Lincoln and Guba, two premier scholars in qualitative research. The use of the term validity is contentious in qualitative research. Many researchers are moving away from the term because of the quantitative overtones. I myself do not use it and require that my students work to establish the quality and the rigor of their study rather than the validity of it. However, for the purposes of this portion of the presentation, we will review the writings from Lincoln and Guba who discuss what, quote, validity is from a qualitative stance. They write that validity can be an irritating concept to grasp for qualitative researchers, but it cannot be dismissed because researchers must be able to answer the question of if their findings are sufficiently authentic that they can trust themselves in acting upon the implications of the findings. Lincoln and Guba explain there are two simultaneous arguments on validity going on. The first, typically found in the positivist paradigm, argues for rigor through the application of the research method. This means there are methodological criteria to be followed during the construction and application of your research methods to help establish the, quote, validity of your study. This argument tells us that there are methodological criteria for quality and rigor. For example, following good formatting for interviews, being serious about your prolonged time in the field and participant observations, developing rich data, etc. The second argument is the one that has been taken up for more discussion in recent qualitative research. This form of establishing, quote, validity requires the researcher to be able to answer the questions, are we interpretively rigorous? Can our co-created constructions be trusted to provide some purchase on some important human phenomenon? Do our findings point to action that can be taken on the part of the research participants to benefit themselves or their particular social contexts? This argument for validity is more commonly taken up in constructivist and critical lenses of theory. In translating this away from the term validity, this means that the rigor of your study should be evident through your interpretation of your findings. This is what leads to good quality research. As I mentioned previously, validity is a very quantitative term with very quantitative criteria. In qualitative research, These criteria don't apply because qualitative researchers conduct naturalistic inquiry, which is research within the natural world, and generally do not attempt to conduct research from an objectivist standpoint. Instead, they approach research and data collection with the understanding that in order to understand human experience and the natural world, we must include human understandings and experiences within our data, and these are typically more subjective than objective in nature. As explained by Erlandson et al., the naturalistic paradigm, valuing as it does the separate realities that have been created by individuals, must also value the way these realities are responded to and the ways in which they enable individuals to respond productively to their environments. What this means is that in order to conduct and assess quality and qualitative research, a paradigm shift is necessary. Validity and reliability are not terms typically used. New terminology represents this paradigm shift in understanding of how to establish that your research is of high quality and rigorous. In other words, is it good? In qualitative research, many researchers will attempt to establish the quality and rigor of their study through trustworthiness rather than validity. The standards of trustworthiness are a way that researchers can be responsive to the multiple realities within the naturalistic paradigm and still establish the quality and rigor of their study. Trustworthiness then is closely connected with rigor. The general idea is that the more rigorous your study is, the more trustworthy your findings are. So then, what is trustworthiness? Trustworthiness is a term that was developed by Lincoln and Guba in 1985 to replace the concept of validity in qualitative research. Trustworthiness is important because it allows researchers to describe the virtues of qualitative terms outside the parameters that are typically applied in quantitative research. To do this, Lincoln and Guba translated commonly used quantitative terms of validity into more appropriate terms to be used for related concepts in qualitative trustworthiness. Erlandson et al. Explained that establishing trustworthiness enables a naturalistic study to make a reasonable claim to methodological soundness. The table you see here is from Erlandson et al.'s 1993 book, Doing Naturalistic Inquiry, A Guide to Methods. Setting specific criteria of good research, the table takes the conventional or quantitative term and translates the concept into appropriate concepts for qualitative researchers in confirming the trustworthiness of their study. The final column includes techniques or methods qualitative researchers use to establish these criteria. So, the term credibility is used for the criteria of truth value of a study and replaces the quantitative concept of internal validity. A credible study is one where the researchers have accurately and richly described the phenomenon in question. This ensures that the data is accurately represented. Credibility is assessed by answering the question of if the researcher's presentation of the phenomenon under study is deemed correct by the participants who experienced the phenomenon. In other words, the participants whom the researchers worked with to generate their data. To establish the applicability of a study, transferability replaces generalizability or external validity. Researchers focus on generating detailed data sets and describing them richly so that other researchers can ascertain the findings' ability to be applicable or transferred to other research contexts. This determines the study's worthiness, not by the generalizability of its results to broader contexts, but by how well other researchers can transfer the findings to alternative contexts. Going back to the writings of Erlandson et al., think about how things this way. Every context shifts over time as the persons in the contexts, their constructions of reality, and the relationships among them also shifts, even if the individuals are the same. Thus, the naturalistic researcher maintains that no true generalization is really possible. All observations are defined by the specific contexts in which they occur. However, this does not mean the knowledge one researcher obtains from a particular context isn't relevant to another. The authors continue, rather than attempting to select isolated variables that are equivalent across contexts, the naturalistic researcher attempts to describe in great detail the interrelationships and the intricacies of the context being studied. Thus, the result of the study is a description that will not be replicated anywhere. The, quote, thick description that has been generated, however, enables observers of other contexts to make tentative judgments about applicability of certain observations for their own contexts and to form, quote, working hypotheses to guide empirical inquiry in those contexts. Dependability replaces reliability in confirming the consistency of a study. Being able to reliably reproduce findings in the exact same context or using the exact same procedures is exceedingly difficult for qualitative researchers. Through dependability, the researcher lays out his or her procedure and research instruments in such a way that others can attempt to collect data in similar conditions. The idea here is that if these similar conditions are applied, a similar explanation for the phenomenon should be found. So, if researchers attempt to conduct a similar study in a similar context, dependability indicates that findings would be repeated in the new study. In qualitative research, reliability looks at the predictability, stability, or accuracy of findings based on a researcher's ability to replicate the study. However, as Erlandson et al. Explain, the naturalistic researcher believes that observed instability may be attributed not only to error, but also to reality shifts. Thus, the quest is not for invariance, but for trackable variance, the variabilities that can be ascribed to particular sources, errors, reality shifts, better insights, etc. Confirmability replaces objectivity in an attempt to establish the neutrality of a researcher. Qualitative researchers do not attempt to declare the objectivity of their findings or observations because they recognize that no methodology can be completely separated from the researcher. So, researchers rely on the confirmability of the data within the study. Confirmability reflects the need to ensure that the interpretations and findings match the data. That is, no claims are made that cannot be supported by the data. So establishing trustworthiness through the concepts of credibility, transferability, dependability, and confirmability has become the most traditional form of quality and rigor in qualitative research. However, there are other methods used that are based on differing paradigms within qualitative research. These methods are equally valid, and researchers may find them to be more appropriate depending on the type of study you're conducting. While I'm not going to review them in this presentation, you can read about both authenticity and ethical relationships in the script. There are additional views such as crystallization and transgression that researchers use as well. Finally, Sarah Tracy approaches quality from another perspective. She provides her viewpoint on the benefits of criteria of quality specific to certain paradigms, theories, or communities versus general criteria. For instance, narrative studies generally have less than 10 participants. While this is good quality for narrative research, it may be an indication of poor quality in other methodologies. Tracy's hope is that a set of universal markers of quality will discriminate between qualitative ends and means. She explains that her goal in presenting these universal markers of quality and that this provides an expansive or, quote, big tent structure for qualitative quality while still celebrating the complex differences amongst various paradigms. Her 8 criteria are, and you can read about these in a little bit more detail in the extended script: worthy topic, rich rigor, sincerity, credibility, resonance, significant contribution, ethics, meaningful coherence. As you may have noticed, there are several areas of overlap in establishing quality in qualitative research. Here are some areas that are common to many, if not all, qualitative researchers in distinguishing quality. These methods have different strengths and establish various aspects of quality in research. If you develop a qualitative study, you will likely use many, if not all, of these methods to confirm the quality and rigor of your research. Establishing quality in qualitative research can be complex, but it is essential to providing the credibility and trustworthiness of your study.